What's up, everyone? It's your boy, Richard Graves. Glad to talk to everyone today. Today we have a very special guest, a gentleman named Billy from, Perma Pastures Farms. Now, I came across Billy from a friend of mine, my friend Martin, down in Arkansas, and he sent me a link to one of Billy's videos, and where he talks a lot about, of course, on his YouTube channels, mostly about farming and things like that. He also talks about life. He talks about politics from time to time. Like I said, I found it fascinating, and it was just a great show and great to listen to him. And I reached out to him, asked him if he'd be on our little show. He said yes, and I appreciate it. And I'm glad that he came on. And, I said, we're going to talk about, Black conservatism and race, and on the left and the right. But we're going to talk a lot about him too, because he's a very interesting story. He's a great guy. Only fault I can find is he was in the wrong branch of the service. He wasn't in the Marine Corps. He was in the Army, but we'll let that one go. So let me bring him on. Welcome to the show, Billy. Come on. All right, man.
You were a Marine, huh?
Yes, sir.
You know what Marine stands for, right?
What does Marine stand for, sir?
My ass rides in Navy equipment.
Well, since you're a guest, I won't do any Army jokes, all right? So I'll let the devil dogs out there know. I'm going to leave the Army jokes alone because he's a special guest of the show today. So I'll get him later. Well, Billy, thanks for coming on the show. I know that I told you how I came up. I found you. A friend of mine sent a link to one of your videos, and I saw it. You were talking about race in America, how Black conservatives are viewed and things of that nature. But I also looked at a lot of your other videos, and you had a lot of information about a lot of different things. It's a pleasure to watch it, So first, before we go anywhere, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I guess you can call me a Christian American heterosexual pro-gun libertarian. I started off as trying to figure this whole thing out. I guess you could say I started off as a Democrat, then a Republican, and a series of events made me, at least convinced me that I got zero in common with with most of the people on the left. I mean, very, very little, and astonishing a lot with the people on the right, notwithstanding a few issues. But I think I find myself more in the liberty-minded camp. So yeah, I guess, I came from a broken home. Mom and dad were both in prison, raised by a grandmother who raised 6 of us. We grew up poor. I guess you don't really know what poor is until you have a basis of understanding when you get older, because everybody else around us was poor too. We almost never ate meat. And when we did, it was organ meat, boiled livers and gizzards. That's what grandma cooked when we had it. So I guess that maybe accounts for why I'm a farmer today. But, later on, found myself in Oklahoma. It's where I pretty much grew up, and, wound up in the Army because, honestly, I didn't feel like I had any options. I mean, it seemed like the only thing available to me at the time. Everybody I knew was a drug dealer. Everybody I knew was, just was really not going anywhere. And I thought, okay, I'll take the first thing I can get, and I'll take it in any way I can. So that brings us to going off to the Army. Met my wife, got married, got out of there eventually. Became a journeyman IBEW electrician, also a part-time talk show host in the biggest talk show station in Kansas City.
Wow.
And, and then eventually got ran out of there when, they try to tell you what you can and can't say. And so anyway, the talk radio world just kind of went away. And I was pretty content to run myself into complete obscurity. I found a way to retire at the age of 48. I'm 50 now. So I retired at 48. There's a long story, I guess, on that. But when I say retired, I mean basically transitioned out of work I didn't want to do and do now full time in work I do want to do. And that's what I call retirement. So here I am. I farm this time of year. I'm basically working 16-hour days. Never been happier in my life doing the work I think the good Lord put me on this planet to do. And frankly, I can't be happier. I mean, at least with the status of my life. But I'll tell you what, I'm definitely not happy with the status quo. I don't like anything I see going on in this world. I initially, like I said, Richard, I was content to go into obscurity and kind of ride off into the sunset. My son talked me into doing a YouTube channel, having done radio and made it something of a name for myself in Kansas City at the time. And I saw how the levers of power and how the levers, I'll put it this way, if people only knew the full extent of how talk show hosts, especially in medium-sized stations and markets, are controlled about what they can and can't talk about, they would lose their minds if they knew the full extent of it. So I was like, okay, forget this world. I'll just do my thing. I'll farm, become a permaculture consultant, designer, all those things. And then my son talked me into it. He says, Dad, we really need to let people know what we got going on here. We're raising chickens for free. We're raising sheep for free. We're raising our eggs for free. We're raising pigs for free. We do all this for free, and we use a design science, what I think is a sublime design science called permaculture. And so I initially got into this hoping to evangelize this wonderful design science to the people in the hood, mostly folks that don't even know that this life exists. They think they got to grow up and be some rapper or some baller or whatever. And if it ain't that, then, you know, their life ain't really worth a whole lot. So I thought I would evangelize this. So I started off calling myself the Permaculture Pimp Daddy, where PIMP was an acronym. It stood for Permaculture is My Passion. But I used it as a hook to try to get people of color on board because I knew young folks would probably gravitate to it. Well, as a later on, I got rid of it completely because I'm thinking, okay, you know what we're doing, regardless of the color of my skin, there ain't nobody on the planet doing what we do. I don't need a gimmick. At the end of the day, I'm hoping that what I do will resonate with enough people, and it has. I'll be honest with you, Richard. I mean, I've had kids in D.C. reach out to me. When I say kid, this guy was a young man, he was a high school teacher in his 20s, looking to get out. He saw a video that we did, and because I called myself at the time the Permaculture Pimp Daddy, he took a second look and then learned more and more and more, and then realized, oh man, I guess I'm not the only conservative out there. And look at this brother, he's out here doing it. And that was the motivation of it, is that for any person of color, regardless of where you are, it could be a mom whose dad just ran off, it could be a single mom whose dad or whose husband just ran off with a go-go dancer, whatever the case may be. If they see somebody like me, the non-traditional farmer, doing things that nobody on this planet has ever done, then it's got to feel a little more accessible to the average brother living in the hood out there.
Wow. And you know, I'm glad you brought that up because you're talking about options. And also you brought up a couple things I want to touch on. One, you broke away from the dichotomy that people always try to put us in. That dichotomy, you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. You know, when I talk about conservatism, it's not about it's not necessarily a politic we're talking about. It is it's a basic standard of values overall. And I think that as as African Americans, most of us being Christians, some Muslims, some atheists, some agnostic, but for the most part, there are those values that are underlying there. At least when they were prominent in our communities were a lot safer and a little different. You talk about how you grew up poor and now you're doing this thing. And a lot of people don't even think about that as an option. Unfortunately, one of the things, and not to go off into the politics deep real quick, but I had a discussion about reparations. Okay. And reparations, theoretically, let's say that we could say that, yeah, okay, we're owed this, if that's what you want to believe. Okay, we're owed the money that the slaves were supposed to get when they were freed, our ancestors were supposed to get. Okay. But, and that's a whole different discussion about how theoretically, but to the point, I'm like, okay, it's not really a rational thing for us to be looking for at this particular point in history. I would always say, well, at this point, we need to start working together and start doing different things, building for ourselves, like what you're doing, farming, agriculture. I know you had mentioned that you went to college when we were talking earlier, but you found a trade, your passion. And I think that a lot of people and don't get me wrong, I have a few degrees, but, I'm a historian. That's what I wanted to do, but I always tell people, just because college is not always the thing. Some people should go to trade school. Some people should go get certifications. Some people should start their own businesses. There's a lot of room for us to do different things. Everybody doesn't have to be a lawyer or a historian, a teacher, or, a doctor or an engineer. There are a lot of things we can get into And I think that, like you're where you are. I believe you're in North Carolina. Am I
Mhm.
correct? Okay, I was stationed down there for a while at Cherry Point back in the day. So
I was at Bragg, so we were close.
I went down to Bragg one time. That's when I got a healthy respect of the Army. Real quick before I go into this, I was at Pendleton, and we go up to Fort Ord. We see the soldiers up there. It's like, Army, we're Marines strutting around in our blues. So I go down to Fort Bragg. For a friend of mine was in 82nd Airborne, and I go to this wedding, and I'm just driving me around the base, and I'm seeing 82nd train, the Ranger Battalion train. I'm like, these guys are insane. These guys, they gave me a whole different look at the United States Army. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be nice while I'm down here. These boys ain't playing. You know what I'm saying? But I tell people that we don't have to stay in inner cities. We don't have to stay. I guess a large chunk of the African American population is in large cities like Chicago, New York, Baltimore, Philly, DC, Atlanta, et cetera, et cetera. And I say, you know what? I feel as if people are kind of trying to keep us trapped and fearful and staying in there. And what I mean by that, I've talked to some African Americans, South Dakota and Nebraska and Montana, that have land. They're doing different things, ranching, cowboys, all kinds of stuff. And we're told to be afraid to go places like that. That racism is waiting for us. When we get down to North Carolina, crosses will be burnt in your yard immediately. Or if you go out to Montana, the militia boys will come looking for you. There's racism and white nationalism everywhere waiting to. So you shouldn't leave the little pockets that we're in together. We got to stay here, which to me is a trick to keep people in a voting block, as opposed to letting people branch out and really experience the other things that we can do as Americans, the other opportunities we have, like what you're doing. How do you talk to African Americans about farming? How's the response you get with the type of stuff that you're doing? You're doing a new type of thing. So how do African Americans respond to you with that?
Be honest with you, I haven't had the opportunity, except in one case. There's a guy named Ryan Cureton. He's the only person of color that I've really had a whole lot of interaction with in this space. Frankly, we're just hard to find. I mean, there's a few of us out there, but sadly, when I've tried to reach out to some of the other ones that have like a higher footprint in this area than I do, there seems to be a reluctance. I don't know what it is. I mean, so by and large, I haven't had a whole lot of opportunity to have a lot of discussions, except when there's conferences or something like that. And then I find out, oh, there's this guy over here doing this. There's this girl over here doing this. But by and large, it's been really tough to get any person of color to get more interested in this. But I got news for you. In light of everything going on, with all this stuff going on, with the inflation going through the roof, I'm telling you what, people better start considering at least growing some of their food in light of these times. Because I got a prediction for you, Richard. The number one pickup line for 2023 is going to be, I got food. I really believe that. I mean, at this rate, I can't even believe it. I'm like, the guys with zero game at all, you don't even have to have that. Just a 50-pound bag of rice is going to get you squared away in 2022 or 2023. 2022, 2023. But back to your question, frankly, I've had some interaction, but by and large, there's not a whole lot of people of color looking to get in this space. And frankly, there's been a few, and there's been an extraordinary impact. I'm just hoping that the more notoriety I get, and it started off small, you got to claw your way up the whole way as far as letting people know what you're doing. Foolishly, I thought that because, and I didn't do it for this reason, but we do a thing called the chicken tractor on steroids. And it's basically a method by which we raise all of our chickens, our meat birds, we raise them for free. We raise all the compost we need for free. We raise all of our eggs for free. We do all that. And I thought just by virtue of that alone, having done more in this system than anybody else on the planet, that there would be people beating down the door saying, hey, how do we do this? And I was hoping that with that understanding and with that notoriety, people of color would say, whoa, look what this brother's doing, man. Maybe I can do it. So far, I haven't seen the impact that I hoped I would. But I'll tell you what, the crucible of hard times has a really good way of making people see the light. And sadly, I think we're heading for real hard times, and if people don't wake up. I'll put it this way: you better wake up and smell the corruption, or you're going to fall asleep drinking the hemlock.
Wow. And I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to give a little history. Obviously, we know Tuskegee University, one of the historically black colleges, that was led for a long time by Booker T. Washington. You know, his primary thing was agriculture, you know, and I think that, you know, back in those days, African Americans were restricted to agriculture and ministry, you know, divinity degrees. And before we were able to move into other spaces as lawyers and doctors, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we've forgotten our roots there, because my dad, he's from Mississippi. He passed away last year. But my dad, he would tell me, you know, I asked him what did they do during the Great Depression. And he said, well, we were growing food. they had a farm, they had food. So it really didn't affect them in the same way. You know, I mean, it affected the whole country, but they weren't hungry, you know. And I think that we, you know, when we talk about, and the reason why I brought up reparations was because people say that we need this in order to build communities, but we really don't. We have the tools that we need. We just have to start making some different decisions. You know, sometimes I hear the homies, you know, you're looking on, you know, I'm watching, you know, Vlad TV or something, and I'm hearing people talking about, I did what I had to do to feed my family. Yeah, all kinds of illegal things. So if you're willing to do that, you should be willing to say, maybe I should go into agriculture. Maybe I should, you know, become a carpenter. Maybe I should become, you know, there's things you can do. You don't have to, you know, and it's not just for people who are doing crime. We're talking about just people who are looking for things to be happy. You know, sometimes, you know, a friend of mine, he has his own business. My friend Gerald, he has a business, and it's a detailing business, and he has a catering business. And he says, yeah, when you work for yourself, you work a lot of hours. When you say you work those 16 hours, that's what it is. And if you're willing to do that, you know, a lot of people are, especially, you know, you might find that you enjoy what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? You might, you know, and I wish people would really give that a chance, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there to be great at it. They just don't know it yet. And this goes back to that politic. You know, I told you for the last 60 or 70 years or so, a city like Chicago, where I live near, close to, has been Democrat that whole time. African Americans have religiously voted for Democrats. All right. And this is quantifiable. This isn't an opinion. The only thing that has happened is black neighborhoods in Chicago under Democratic leadership have gotten worse. You know, schools worse, crime worse, economic opportunity worse, jobs worse, you know, leaving the community. Now, I don't blame all those factors on the Democratic Party, but I do blame the fact that we're not holding people accountable. You know, we're just voting for people. And I like when you brought up, you know, it's not about, you know, you're about liberty. It's not about being Democrat or Republican. I always tell people, vote for the person who has the interests of your community, whatever that community is going to do the bidding of the people of the community to bring the best things to your community and hold them accountable. And, you know, and don't just vote for them because they got a D by their name, you know, and don't just assume someone with an R by their name isn't the one that you should be voting for, or somebody with an I by their name, an independent. You know, we have a system now that says if you vote for an independent, you're throwing away your vote, which is ridiculous. You know, we really should be voting for people that we know are going to be accountable to our communities and bring us the best that they can so we can do our own building, whatever that may be.
I couldn't agree more. Give me 1 second. Let me put some light on, because I'm out here on the porch. Maybe that's a little better.
Yeah, you look like you're relaxed.
Okay, I was looking. I'm like seeing myself on there. I'm like, man, what's going on here? You know, okay, you're clearly a fan of superhero movies, just like I am.
Oh yeah.
And by the pictures I see, I judge by the pictures I see behind you. I see Thor. I see. I can't really see the other one so much.
Yes.
But is that Vision? I can't tell.
That's Captain America.
Okay. Captain America. Okay. Remember in Captain America: Civil War. There's that scene where he's presented with this Faustian bargain, is what I'll call it, where he could sit here and go along because everybody else was doing it, or he could do that hard right instead of that easy wrong. And I know it's fiction, but I'm a sucker for those kind of superhero movies. Always have been, always will be. But I remember that thing, and then seeing the posters in the background, I'm sitting there thinking, how fitting. I mean, right there in fiction, it showed the enormous sacrifice that he had to make to do the right thing, and at great cost to himself and to his friends and to his relationships. I see it no differently now, especially when we get into politics, where I see Republicans in general. You know, I'm not saying this about you or any other person that may lean to the left or right, but generally, by and large, at the highest echelons, I see it as a pyramid. Generally, you got one on the left, you got one on the right, but where they're aiming is all to a corrupt middle and the corrupt top. I see them working together. I see very few outlaws. I see very few mavericks. I see very few people that are willing to take these hard stands like Cap did in those movies. I mean, I can't think of anything more fitting. And so I don't see this necessarily as a left-right paradigm. I see it as downright corruption. And if at the end of the day you got a D behind your name, but you make sense, like for example, as of late, RFK Jr. He said a lot of good things. He's a Democrat, and he said a lot of good things regarding some of the things that are being imposed upon us that I fully agree with. On the right side, okay, you may have a Rand Paul who talked a whole lot about liberty. And then you got all these people that seem to fit in between. You got the Lindsey Grahams, polecat, up one side, down the other, where I'm standing. And then you got all these people on the right and left. I see no difference between them. And then when you find out what I did when I was doing talk radio, you end up finding out, and this was a hard thing for me to see, is that all these politicians, when, you know, you see it differently when you work in the media, because you see what happens. You see them have this bitter debate on stage, and then afterwards they're talking about going out to dinner together or going over somebody else's house. You realize that it's one big parlor game. It's one big joke. These people are all sleazy up one side and down the other. Now, Richard, I said in the video that I put out earlier today, I was flipping compost, and I'm showing people out there how to make an 18-day compost pile. And I brought up Cato. Since you're a historian, maybe I'm sure you'll appreciate where I'm going to go with this. Mm-hmm. You think of Cato, who was a senator in ancient Rome right before when Rome made the transition from a republic to an empire. Mm-hmm. Cato was going into the Senate in Rome, seeing exactly what was going on, complaining about what Julius Caesar was doing in Gaul, which is modern-day France. Mm-hmm. And he's standing up there in Rome. All the senators wore white. Cato wore black. Why did he wear black? Because it was signifying that he was going to a funeral. He knew that the Roman Republic was going to turn into an empire. He knew that the way of life, now granted, there were clearly problems in the Roman Republic, and before that, the Roman kings, and before that, the Etruscans. So he knew that it was making that transition from a republic to basically a dictatorship. That's another word for an empire. I mean, it certainly wasn't an oligarch, but Cato wore black because he saw what was unfolding at that time. And honestly, I'm wearing black right now. I mean, by accident, wasn't intentionally, although that would have been cool. But I can't help but think where I see what's going on. I'm sorry if I've gone on a little bit too long, but maybe I'm going a little bit far afield.
No,
but
go ahead.
I feel like Cato in ancient Rome, feeling the need to wear black because I'm looking at all these opportunities that are probably going to go away thanks to a bunch of rhino Republicans and lunatic Democrats all working together to make us all serfs. This is the road to serfdom. And I see it exactly the same way Cato saw it 2,000 years ago. Well, 1,500 years ago.
Right. Well, I find it interesting, again, that you throw out that dichotomy that people try to force us in. People try to force us in this left-right, you know, you're a progressive or conservative. They try to put you in that box, you know, that it's either this or that. And it's in order to encapsulate their own arguments. If they're disagreeing, yeah, no problem. If they're disagreeing with you. And you brought that up. I find it interesting. I was having a conversation about Roe v. Wade. And I was talking to someone and they said, well, you're pro-life, so you definitely against the death penalty. I said, And I said, not really. I think there's some people who should be executed. I just don't think that I don't trust the state to do it. And I can't make a law that says let's execute the ones we really, really know are guilty without eventually executing someone who isn't. That's my only bones with it. That you might be wrong. I don't trust our criminal justice system to be right all the time. And that's, I'd rather have 1,000 locked up guilty men than one executed innocent man. So, and I've seen enough people that were on death row that were found out to be not guilty. Not guilty at all. Not like they were guilty of something else. It's just they were the definite wrong person. That so I'm not for it. But they said, well, you should be for it for the sanctity of life. I said, no, that's not my position. And that's when I realized that people want to pigeonhole you in one way. You can't have nuanced thoughts. You can't think things. You can't have, and that's unfortunate because that's how you grow. You can't just say this is where I am. I'm on this side of the fence and that's it. That's all. You have to be able to be open to listen to things and then weigh things and then come to your conclusions. And you might learn something, and that you might teach somebody something. So I'm glad that you don't put yourself within those boundaries, because when you do, it's almost impossible to have discussions with people, especially if they're putting themselves on a side they think is opposite of yours, because they make assumptions about what you believe and what you think, as opposed to asking you. And I don't want to pick on the left too much, because you and I we were talking earlier. I said, yeah, there is racism on the left and the right. There is your basic racism everywhere. You got people who are black who are racist, black who are racist. I tell people that you can be a racist if you think you're superior or inferior to someone because of your color. That's racist technically. And a lot of people didn't like that. I said that. They're like, no, you have to have power, and only white people can be racist. I'm like, no, that's something different. And I said, we're talking about white people, we're talking about dominant culture. You can have white supremacy or white nationalism. Those things are real. You can have those, and those are dangerous things we've seen throughout American history. There is no equivalent, a black nationalism or black supremacy, because now that you can't have. You can have people who feel that way, but they don't really have power to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, but that isn't, that's one of the conversations I have with the left that people don't like. Well, no, you black people can't be racist. And it made me realize, why are you so? This a white liberal tell me that black people can't be racist. I'm saying, yes, I know some black people just don't like certain people because of their race. And then I had to say, why are you so committed to saying that that's not possible? I mean, are we less human? We have less of a range of emotions than everybody else. And then I realized that it is for them to have the moral high ground at all times with race. So if I'm talking to a person who is a conservative, and is to try to keep them from even talking about the topic. Mm-hmm. So if I'm talking to a white male who's conservative, and I've had this happen when I'm talking to a group of people, and white liberals will tell the white conservative that, oh, you can't have an opinion about race because you're not black. I'm like, what? Of course he can have an opinion. Whether I agree with it or not, he can have an opinion. And how else are we going to learn from each other unless we have a conversation? Or they presuppose it, where they'll say, well, I'm just a white person, I have my privilege, but what do you presuppose? What's that for? It's like, and it's condescending. At that point, it's like, come on, man, can we have a real discussion? And it's funny. I'm going to tell you something very funny. As you see, I have my comics here, and I also watch Star Trek, so I have my full geek card. There was a conversation on Facebook group about Star Trek Discovery. It's one of the new Star Trek shows, and there's another one, Star Trek Picard. I've watched both of them, and so people were ranting and raving about how woke Discovery was, like it was a good thing. And I said, well, I found it condescending. I didn't really, I enjoyed the first season. I just went into my thing. I didn't tear it down. I just said it wasn't for me. I liked Picard better. It was less preachy. It made similar points, but it made them organically. And people started responding to me. I was like, this is the biggest argument I've ever got on Facebook, a big split about Star Trek. So then I finally said something. And then it was a white liberal, because they were all liberals. And she jumps on me. Well, you just don't like Discovery because it means that you and your kind are no longer in power. Because one of the points I made was, I said there were no white men on the bridge of this ship. There were no white men on the liver. But I was just making an observation. So I said, I have my icon on Facebook is Dr. Doom, right? So I said, okay, I understand that I have a picture of a European dictator who's trying to kill Reed Richards, but I am an African American, been African American for 51 years, you know. And so then the person who went first said, well, I don't see any indication that you're black by what you're saying or how you're talking. I said, oh, I'm sorry. How am I supposed to talk for me to be black? I said, you need to see a picture of me in the west side of Chicago with the GDs or the Vice Lords or something. Will that make you believe that I'm black? But it was just amazing to me that this person could not see past the conversation to have the conversation and assume that I was a white male because I made the observation that there were no white males in the command on this ship. There were no white males on the ship, on the bridge. They weren't. You know, I think there might have been one for a couple episodes, but overall, didn't have much of a speaking role. And I said, I get that, but I said, I thought the whole point of Star Trek was to show a world where that sort of thing didn't matter, you know, but it was fascinating. I never thought the most hardcore social political discussion I would have would be about Star Trek, but it was, you know, so.
It's funny you mentioned that because I had almost exactly the same experience, and I had it numerous times. Now, I'm in North Carolina, and I'm about 45 minutes away from Asheville. I live in a small town, but, I mean, in fact, I live in the boonies. I mean, I got to work hard to get a phone signal where I live, and I love it here. It's isolated, no neighbors. You know, I love it, but I'm still close enough to where I do go to town from time to time. Usually at least once a week because I've worked with some partners there. But I got involved. I was invited. I didn't ask to be there, but I got invited to where there was like this farmers get together. And it was basically a bunch of liberal folks in Asheville. Now, I'll be honest with you. I grew up at a time in Oklahoma, and like you said, we were talking beforehand, where there was a lot of blatant, absolute racism growing up. I mean, people would throw the N-word out in the middle of a sentence and then have the audacity to say, oh, no offense, I didn't mean you. And this was pretty common growing up in Oklahoma. And, okay, so I saw, honestly, man, I spent a lot of time in the Deep South, especially through the military and whatever. I've never seen worse racism in my life as what I saw in Oklahoma growing up, even when I got out of the Army and I made the awful mistake of going back there. Anyway, I digress. So I'm invited to this meeting, and I said all that as a backdrop. I get to this meeting, and I'm basically listening, and then these people ask me, everybody's going around the room saying what they do. And in every single one of these, it was me and one girl in there were the only black folks in there. And they get to her, and she's basically trying to find her way into the farming world. They get to me, and I kind of play down what I do. I just said, look, I'm a farmer. I do this, and this, and then just kind of pass the baton. And then everybody in there had a hairy hard luck story about how they can't make it. This girl, single mom, apparently has a couple of kids, talking out as a farmer, can barely put bread on the table, and then finds a way to turn the conversation, like looks at me like, know what I mean? And I look back and I said, no, I don't know what you mean. And she says, I said, what made you think I would know what you mean? Well, you know, you've had it hard. She made all these incredible assumptions about my life. Yeah, I mean, it was hard growing up, but where my life is right now is, yes, I am retired. We produce all of our meat here, a fair portion of what we produce here, okay? But I'm not suffering by any means. And like I said, we produce such abundance that I got to give it away. Wow. My freezers are full. I have to give it away. But this woman in here, white liberal, female, just looks over at me as if I can absolutely, understand any. And then when I kind of acquiesce a little bit, then another person finds a reason to bring me into this conversation, automatically assuming that because of the color of my skin, that I'm of this political persuasion. Well, I made it very clear at a certain point in this conversation that I'm not at all on the leftist tradition. I don't come from that. I don't have a problem with you folks, but I don't see the world. Richard, I'm telling you, as I'm standing in front of you here right now, that backdrop of racism that I experienced in Oklahoma dwarfed in comparison when all those woke liberals in that room realized that I was off the plantation. When they realized right there, and I had another run with Antifa white folks in Asheville one time, calling me Uncle Tom and everything else. the point being is that the most obvious, blatant racism I've ever experienced in my life has come from the people on the left, despite some of the awful things that I've witnessed and experienced growing up. Um, it dwarfs in the comparison of what I witnessed from these so-called woke liberals that and I've seen this over and over and over again since that time, because I've come to figure out one thing. Once they realize that I don't see myself as a victim, all of a sudden it's coming off the top rope. I am the worst person in the world. They don't want to talk to me. And then when I talk about solutions, when I'm telling them, hey, they're telling me, okay, I got this problem. I can't grow this. And I'm like, well, have you considered doing this? Or, I can't grow chickens. I can't afford the feed. And I'm like, well, have you looked at my YouTube channel? I'm showing the whole world how to produce chickens, eggs, and compost for free. All I keep hearing from these folks is excuses. But all at the same time, they don't. The second they find out that I'm not believing, that I'm not in this box, I'm not chained at the bottom of Plato's cave like you folks are, because I'm one of the people like Plato describes in the allegory of the cave, because I found my way out of the cave and I see that there's blue sky, there's green grass. It's not just shadows on the wall anymore. I'm not believing this virtual BS that's down at the bottom of the cave where you folks are. And just like in Plato's allegory of the cave, they want to kill me. So, yeah, and I'm sure you can relate with it. But the number one, I'm not saying that racism on the left and right does not exist out there. All I know is that the most blatant, obvious, palpable racism that I've witnessed in my life has come from these people from the so-called woke left.
Wow. And I'll be honest with you. I have been called. I've had, like I said, a lot of times on social media discussions, people don't immediately know I'm African American. And when I do say it, well, I've had white liberals try to tell me that, you're a sellout or you're Uncle Tom, and I'm like, really? So we're going there because I don't agree with the whole agenda that you're pushing forward. And primarily the one is the victimhood one. One time I was listening to National Public Radio, and there was a person on there, a professor from the University of Chicago, and she was talking to African Americans on the streets of Chicago and asking them how they got in their position. She talked to a guy who recently got out of prison. He was saying, hey, I made some bad choices. I ended up in prison. I'm out of prison now. I'm working on getting my bachelor's degree, in social work. I want to help young kids, blah, blah, blah. Next person she goes to, single mom. How'd you get in your position? I made some bad choices. I had children too early, but, I finished a nursing program. I'm working in nursing now. She talked to maybe 5 or 6 African Americans, and they all said, hey, I made some bad choices. She said with a straight face, I'm assuming a straight face, but with a straight voice, that these blacks do not realize they're victims of a system of systemic and institutional racism. And I called NPR. I was like, they were taking calls, and they would not let me get through my call. They said, what's your comment? I said, I said what I felt about the statement. And don't get me wrong, as I do understand there is a thing called systemic and institutional racism. It's a thing, all right? It affects certain aspects of the systems and institutions that we have going. Primarily the one I've seen up close has been in the banking system. That's why Chase and Washington Mutual and a few other companies had to settle some significant lawsuits because of the fact that if you or I were to go for a loan with the same credit score and the same debt to income ratio as someone else, that we would kind of be guided to the B or C paper loan as opposed to the A paper loan. And this is the practice that they did. So I get it. It exists, but it is nowhere near what it was in the 1800s. And I hear people making these obscene statements like, yeah, we got it the same as people did in slavery. I'm like, what? I'm like, no, we don't. I said, that's an insult to our slave ancestors to say that. All right. I said, and I tell them our slave ancestors, when they were freed, they went and started building together. They built cities, they built farms, they built schools, and they had help, but they did that. And I said, they did it so well that the Ku Klux Klan eventually started burning things down. And then what they do? They went and built more stuff. All right. They kept doing it until you get to the civil rights movement. And then all of a sudden we have this idea that we can't do anything. Woe is us. We need the system to help us. We need the government to help us. Don't get me wrong. The government has a role in all things in society, but you have a role yourself. And I don't go with that false economy. It's either society or the individual. No, everybody has a role here. We have a responsibility to society. Society has a responsibility. That's old Enlightenment, Rousseau and Voltaire thinking there. So that's just basic. This is part of the foundations of the Western world. So, but to think, I keep hearing when I talk to people on the left, I'm keep getting told that we can't because we need this. We need them to save us. That we can't do this by ourselves. That we can't simply say, why don't we change the culture of how we look at things? Why don't we change the culture of our communities? Why don't we try to do different things? Why don't we our communities and go out in other places and find other places where there's opportunities, jobs, and try, or even opportunities to do businesses or to do what you do. We're being told that we can't do that. And now that argument, I'm like, okay, it's all well and fine. I say it's illogical because these people say systemic and institutional racism exists. Okay, we give you that, it does. So then my first thing is, okay, that means it's president of the Democratic Party and on the left. Like, no, it's not. I said, yes, it is. I said it has to be. And systemic and institutional racism is an issue. It's systemic, the system being politics, the institution being the Democratic and Republican parties. Now, these people always agree that it's within the Republican Party. So why would you not think it's within the Democratic Party? Like you said, a pyramid, two sides going to the same direction to feed some people up here. And they don't want to see that. Then I say further to the point, when white liberals argue about reparations, white liberals argue with me about why I should be seeking reparations. And I personally, I think it's to the left. I think it's an emotional issue they put out there to manipulate black voters. You know, it's a promise that they know they're never going to fulfill. It's something that's not going to happen. It's like having a person chasing after the Easter Bunny instead of chasing after real life things in order to change a community. So again, but if people believe that, I say, okay, so you believe that we're in a racist society. You believe the majority of the society is going to just decide to, yeah, let's go ahead and give you guys a few $1 billion. Not happening, if that's what you believe. So it's not even logical based on the presuppositions they have. Then to make it worse, it's like, okay, how do we determine who's black? There's a big argument. There's a big argument in California about determining which blacks even qualify. They're saying we have to have a relative that was a descendant of slaves that was here before 1900. I'm like, who's making these rules? You know, and I see that as a division tactic that divides African Americans from Afro Caribbeans and Afro Latinos if we're going to, be in the same communities and work together. So it's just like, I'm like, are you guys really serious? Are you thinking about what you're saying here? I said, so what? I have I did my ancestry.com thing. I have 11% Western European from Norway and Germany. All right. So does that mean I only get 90% of the reparations? I mean, does Barack Obama? Well, he probably wouldn't get none because they say his dad is not a real African. But let's say Barack Obama's children, do they only get 50% because of Michelle? I mean, it's like, come on, man. So now we have an argument in California about fake money that no one's ever going to get, instead of working towards positive policy changes that can affect the communities we're in. Communities at a time. The black community is not this big monolith. You have blacks in Baltimore and Chicago and New York, and each of those communities have some similar things, some different things. They got to deal with what they got to deal with. In New York, I got into an argument with a Civil War. So that's Thomas Jefferson from the City Hall. All right. And they were celebrating. We took down this Thomas Jefferson statue and they were celebrating. I'm like, okay. And he was a slave owner. I'm like, who wasn't back then? I mean, what rich white guy wasn't a slave owner back then? I'm not saying that it was right. I'm saying that's the reality of the situation. I was like, so let me get this straight. You guys took down a statue of Thomas Jefferson from the New York City Hall. How has this affected the lives of the average African American in New York City? Has this put any more food on anyone's table? Has this increased anyone's wages? Has this helped them start a business? Has this helped them go to school? Anything? Well, we're just happy. No, what are you happy about? That's the type of stuff I just don't get it.
I don't get it all the way around either. Hey, if I'm a little close, I'm outside on my porch and this wind. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me and everything. Going back to this reparations thing. Okay, so let's think this to its whole conclusion. All right. So if we're going to give reparations for those that were enslaved, so how far back do we go? Because we were just talking a little bit about when Caesar conquered Gaul.
Hmm.
So, okay. So what did they do? They took a lot of slaves. Every time Rome would conquer someplace, they took slaves. Okay. So every preceding civilization that came into the picture made slaves of the one before them. Okay, so there were slaves all the way around. We still got slavery going on in sub-Saharan Africa to this day.
And
Actually,
quite a
thanks
few
to
other
what
places
Obama did,
too.
we got it going on in North Africa, in Libya, which was once the jewel of Africa. Is anyway. Point being, where do you stop these reparations? It's the same argument that I have against where, and this is going to sound controversial, but I can prove it from a historical standpoint. Why is it every Holocaust museum is only composed of just Jews? Okay, if we're
Ooh.
going to talk about Holocaust, you're going to tell me 6 million. They get their own museum, but where's the Holocaust museum for the 60 million natives? Because I'm part native of Minqua Indian out of Pennsylvania. Where's the Holocaust museum for them? Okay? You're telling me it was 6 million, but they have a monopoly on Holocaust. So how come they're, I better chill on this because they probably drop the feed if too many people hear me saying this. The fact is, just like we put reparations within a certain box, which I don't, by the way, I don't agree with. Um, but as I understand it, there were reparations paid to um, the Jews that were in some of the camps. Now there's an alternative history to some of this stuff that I can't get into right now. But the point being is that how is it these supposed 6 million people they get a whole monopoly on Holocaust, and only the black folks in America for what period of time? And you threw in a bunch of caveats in there that are right on the money. At what point do you drop off? Okay, what about the guy that is a second generation American who came from, let's say, Italy? Okay, so let me get this right. Because he was Italian, part of the Roman Empire, so he's going to owe reparations to, since now he's an American citizen, he's going to owe Gaul, he's going to owe France, he's going to owe England, he's going to owe Germany. This guy ain't going to have a he ain't gonna have a he ain't gonna have the shirt on his back when it's all said and done. When they get finished bleeding him out for the American, that he's only a second generation American. So where does it stop? I mean, I see this. Yes, slavery was an evil um, that continues to this day. But let's be honest too, because if you look at the whole thing, there was whole lot of black slave owners. In fact, the first litigation in the United States happened in Massachusetts over one black man claiming that he owned another one. That was the first time slavery was even litigated in the United States. And I wish I could remember the name of the case, but that was in Massachusetts. So it wasn't just exclusive to one person to another. In fact, 90% of all the people that were enslaved during the Roman Empire were white, considered barbarians, but they were still very much white.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we stop? I mean, these people that have these pet, like I said, whether it comes to the Jewish people in the Holocaust or whether it comes with these reparations and black folks, there's all these pet things that don't enable people to move past.
Right. Well, and I want to try to clean it up so we don't get, because I hear what you're saying. I think that with the Jewish people during the Holocaust, obviously, since that's so recent, and I know it's, we're going almost 100 years, but that is recent history. And I think because of it being in part of this modern time, this post-Enlightenment world that we lived in, that's why I think those things hit a little harder. Because I always tell people, if you look at the timeline of when Christopher Columbus came to the United States, the Enlightenment hadn't even begun yet. I think the Renaissance was still going on. So when you look at the Enlightenment ideas are what established Western society. And Enlightenment ideas have a lot of Christian influence in it. All right. So Enlightenment ideas is where we get these concepts of liberty and personal autonomy and freedom and all those different things that we hold dearly now. So I think that we come into a world, like take, for example, how Christopher Columbus is judged, not for the criminal actions that he did, that he ended up getting locked up for, but how he's now become this caricature where every time it's Christopher Columbus Day, we got to hear about everything that happened and how they went for slavery, the Native American, everything that's happened in the West is bad. They blame on Christopher Columbus. All right. And I always tell people, I say, okay, don't get me wrong. I get it. But again, how far back do we go? I mean, we can make some direct causations with that. And I think in the United States, obviously, there had been slavery in the world in other places before. And obviously, even in Africa, in West Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, North Africa, East Africa, there were blacks that had people who were black that held each other as slaves. But I always tell people the thing that makes things a little weird in the United States when it comes to that is prior to, I think I went back to about 1444, maybe 1447. There was no such thing as black people or white people, really. All right. You had people who were, like you said, Gauls, you had Celts, you had Anglo Saxons, you had Slavs. In Africa, you had Yoruba, you had Husafalani, you had Igbos, you had a lot of different people that never saw themselves as black or white. I mean, they obviously knew they had different hues of skin. They saw each other as human. They knew that if they were enslaving someone, they were enslaving a human being. There was no disconnect there. I think that in order to facilitate the transatlantic slave trade, what you see happening is the development of those identities of black and white. And I think that is where our problems come from in the West, the identification of black and white. And I think that, obviously that creates a situation where blacks being on the bottom of the social ladder, whites being on top of it. But it wasn't as cut and dry as people like to believe. What we are seeing manifest in race relations here is really, I would say, a post-Civil War thing. All right, because prior to the Civil War, and I'm not by any means trying to sanitize slavery, and I know there's going to be some people that get upset when I say this. When I see, people, you ever heard that term, Irish people were slaves too? All right. Well, there's a lot of truth to that. And what I mean by that is that from the early 1600s, I think you probably heard the 1619 Project that emphasizes slavery, but you also had a white indentured servitude that came from Wales, Ireland, parts of England, and there were a lot of them over here. And, that at one point they outnumbered the slaves tried to catch up a number, but you had I think over 150 rebellions. Now they categorized them as slave rebellions, but they were actually rebellions of working class people, the indentured servants and the slaves, and there were black indentured servants too, that actually were fighting, were actually get pissed off at the landowner class for being on that, as you said, serfdom stuff. These were land barons. All right, they own land, and people would rise up, and then there'd be a rebellion, and they squash it. These blacks and whites were marrying each other. They kept passing laws to try to stop it from happening. I found out part of my ancestry, apart from Norway, comes from a marriage, back in the 1700s, around 1768. When I did my little tree, a woman from Norway and a guy from Scotland got married, and then their son married a black woman in Pennsylvania later. So you find out, I know we're told that, the slave owners raped all the black women, and that's how we have our European ancestry, but that doesn't really, I don't want to get controversial, but when you look at the history, you see that people were marrying and having babies with each other. Because again, not a large percent of the Southern population owned slaves. And so you have these people living and working together up until you get to right before the Civil War. You got a very few rich dudes who decide that they want to keep slavery because obviously the North was going to have a labor advantage. The North wanted to get rid of it because the South had an unfair labor advantage. So the North, we're going into this industry age, and these guys are keeping this wealth, and they don't have to pay nobody really. They don't have these problems. So, and of course, there was the moral issue. Don't get me wrong. Abolitionists wanted to get rid of slavery. There were Christian abolitionists that wanted to get rid of it because it was the wrong thing to do in our post-Enlightenment world. As they do this, as they build up the Civil War, that's when you start seeing the imagery of black people changing, because people like Jefferson Davis and his vice president, I forgot his name, started putting out propaganda. That black men were running around trying to rape white women, and and they're going to rape your daughters, and all this propaganda comes out. And when it comes out, it really changes what race relations look like in the country. Don't get me wrong. Again, I'm not trying to sanitize the pre-Civil War slavery. It was slavery and it was bad. I'm not trying to say it was nice, nor am I trying to equate the white indentured servants with the slaves after a certain point. When you get into the 1800s, especially when white males get the right to vote, period, not just the landowners, you start seeing that change. The definition of whiteness grows. They start letting people in. See, before it was just you had to be kind of a aristocratic Scottish person or Dutch person or an Englishman to have that white status. Everybody else was considered white trash, and they use that term. We use it now one way, but they meant that. They meant it. I mean, they meant that. They were dead serious about it. These people weren't given full whiteness at all. You don't see the Irish really get their whiteness until the late 1800s in the industrial age. You don't see the Italians get their whiteness until after World War II. The Slavs and the Greeks. And think about it. The country was named after an Italian, founded by an Italian, and Italians didn't really get their white card until after World War II. Prior to that, Italians were in the hood. I mean, you've seen the movies with Charlie Luciano, Lucky Luciano, and the guys in the outfit in Chicago, the Capones. These people are considered thugs and undesirables. So the definition of whiteness grows to include people, and this is the problem we've had in our country. I think at this point, though, we've come to a point. What I don't like, and like I said, what I don't like is not saying that racism exists. It's saying that what we have is the same problem we had during slavery or the same problem we had during Jim Crow. No, that's an excuse to me. I'm 52, all right, and I'm one of the first children after the Civil Rights Movement. We, of course, have obstacles, but we also have more opportunities than people have. We have a chance to change our own situation, and to say that I have it as bad, sitting here on my $1,800 computer with all my degrees in the background, talking to you, talking to the world, to say I have it the same as one of my ancestors was in the 1800s is an insult to them. It really is, and that's one of the things that really works my nerve about it is people don't want to deal with the reality of what we have right now. We have a reality where we can change our reality. We can move. We decide, you know what? I want to move to this. I want to move to North Carolina. I can do that. If I want to move to New York City, I can do that. If I want to, we have opportunities. So we can't, it just frustrates me when we're constantly told what we can't do. It's like the defeatist mentality is being sold to us. And we've got to break away from that. I don't care who's pushing it, be they from the left or the right. We got to break away from that. That's my
victims. We're victims of comfort. That's really what I think we are. I think at this point we're victims of comfort. If we stop back and we think about, just take this fact alone. Excuse me. For the first time ever in the United States of Amnesia, as Gore Vidal put it, you were allowed during the founding of this country, for the first time in human history, a guy like you or me or anybody else out there, by and large, could buy property and defend it with a firearm. Mm-hmm. That in and of itself was the most revolutionary thing. It had never happened in history, and it was the talk of the town on every corner of this planet. But going back to this slavery thing, I would submit to you, Richard, that we're in a worse, more insidious type of slavery than that has ever existed before. And I would quote, and I'm going to loosely quote, a guy, he was a Native American guy, ran for president. And I don't know that anybody's ever said it better than him, that America is one giant Indian reservation. We have a population that thinks they're free, living in prisons with bars they can't see.
Wow.
And that's not how he put it, is that, it's the worst kind of servitude and the worst kind of prison, because the people, honestly, that are in it have no idea that they are slaves and chained to the bottom of Plato's cave. And the worst insidious type. It was like Harriet Tubman was credited saying that, I freed 1,000 slaves. Could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. And wow. If you think about it, having the ability to read and study only enables you to be a higher functioning slave if you don't have the sense to know if what you're reading is true or false, or what you're being told is accurate or inaccurate, or whether the people over at Fox News or MSNBC, or you pick your prostitute media. If you have no ability to determine with any certainty, if you don't have this framework, if you don't have this level of discernment, then you're just a higher functioning slave. And I think it's worse now. I think it's worse now, Richard, than it's ever been, because here it is. They got these little devices here, Mm-hmm. I didn't mean to shot it into the camera, but here it is. supposed to make us smarter. But I look around me and I see zombies. And I know there's a lot of talk in the movies. You know, they got Walking Dead and some of the other zombie movies out there, the one with Will Smith, you name it. And I think it's indicative of the life we really have, where we have these phones that, like George Washington said, you know, when he talked about fire, it can be a dangerous servant or a fearful master, depending on how you use it. Now, an academic like yourself, I'll bet any amount of money that when you might have a little time where you're looking out, okay, what's the next Marvel movie? It's going to show up, just like I probably would every once in a while, you know. But by and large, I know that I use this as a research tool. I use it as a means to educate myself, being an autodidact, knowing that the best information I'm ever going to find out is the information I seek for myself, not the one that's spoon fed to me. You know, like so many of us are just content to be spoon fed information and not ask ever in the course of our lives a critical question about it. Think about it, brother. From the time we're little, we have this childlike wonderment where we look at the world around us and we think and believe that we can do, be, say, dream anything. And then somehow through this system, call it indoctrination through the public schools or whatever the case may be, somehow, some way it's all beaten out of us. And then we just revert back to being, we were more free when we were children from a mental standpoint, I believe, than we are as adults, because somehow they beat us into this system of thinking that we're in this false left-right paradigm, of thinking that these are the only choices I have, not knowing that there's people out there like you who are academics, because you know what, by and large, they're not going to see you. The brother that's looking at his phone in the hood is never going to come across you and is never going to come across me. They're not going to know that these opportunities exist. They're not going to know that they don't have to be within this narrow parameter of life. They don't know that they could go after Moby Dick in that rowboat and take the tartar sauce with them. They don't know that. They don't have any idea. We are in the worst type of insidious slavery that Aldous Huxley, that evil, diabolical dude from way back, wrote Brave New World. He predicted that we would wind up in America being in a society where we would have people living in a level of servitude that they ought not to enjoy, that everything in their fiber should be telling them, this ain't right. This shouldn't be possible. This is not a way to live. But what do you see? We now have a culture where we celebrate idiots and castigate intellectuals.
Yes.
I mean, where do you think that leads? Where do you think that leads? I mean, sadly, I see, and I kind of joked about it from the very beginning about where this is going, but sadly, when you hit this level of depravity and decadence, history proves, and you know this as a historian, that I'm right. The only cure to unbridled decadence and depravity is the crucible of really hard times. You had, think about it, the only time where society has ever corrected itself, and look, I mean, in recent times, let's look at the Great Depression. Before that, in the Roaring 20s, it was the Roaring 20s, chicken in every pot. Everybody was living good. We also started to see the beginnings of depravity in there, right? Then what happened? Stock market crash, Great Depression. We had 90% of the people in America, 90% lived in the country, 10% lived in the city. And we still lost 8 to 10 million people to starvation during the Great Depression, but you never hear about those numbers. Okay, so we take all that and we kind of combine it. I'm sorry, I don't mean to monologue too long,
No,
but man,
go ahead, man. Go ahead.
There's so many passionate things in here, and I'm getting so much listening to you and hearing your historical backdrop. This is honestly one of the most enjoyable, in fact, probably the most enjoyable and edifying interview I think I've ever done.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I thank you very much for that, because frankly, good conversation is the first thing I look for and the last thing I find these days.
Yes,
and
it's hard.
I mean, I'm sure you would agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I'll throw it back to you because I do have to roll here before too long.
All right. Well, and I'll make this quick.
Too long, but man, it's
I'll make this quick. You're making an absolutely true observation. I'd like to add to that the Roaring 20s was what was called the progressive era. Okay. This was the progressive era. This is progressivism. Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. At that time, things were, as we moved into the progressive era, we were leaving the Gilded Age. And that's how we got into that free fall of excess, and everything was good, and we ran straight into the Great Depression. And it was a great corrector. All right.
What did it
And
produce? What did it produce, Richard? You wouldn't have had what some people call the greatest generation if it hadn't been that crucible of really hard times.
right.
If we thought we had a Great Depression then, I think with all, and I'm not trying to be a gloom and doomer here, but I'm looking at what I see. As a farmer, I know grain prices. As a farmer, I know what is I see this freight train heading toward the brick wall,
Oh
and
yeah.
we are heading for the greatest depression, barring a miracle.
Oh yeah. We're about. I know they keep trying to prep us for a recession, you know, and you can call it what you want to. All right. You got gas prices up here over $5 a gallon. Grain price going up. Food prices going up. Yeah. You look at what you're buying. You go buy a bag of Doritos, you're going to spend $6 in some places. So you have to realize that this is real. And I'm not blaming any particular party or any particular president, because this is a cumulative thing. This has been rolling this way for a minute, and we're finally going to hit this. And it is not going to be comfortable. And people need to be able to be prepared for it. And again, I don't know what the Federal Reserve or the people smarter than me when it comes to economics are going to do. This is one conversation I'd love to have with Thomas Sowell, because he's so smart about economics. But yeah, I think that unfortunately, this might be the thing to make people rethink how we live, because we're heading for something, man. And now, like I said, it is the reality of the situation. And I know you got to go. So I'll be real quick. And I want to add that a lot of what you said, man, is straight on point, man. You have a good understanding of history. And I'd like to add, as I consider myself an academic, but I've realized, I used to always say, in academia, you can find people that are, that you can talk to, that, understand these things. But I've met a lot of educated fools, my friend, in academics. And why I say that is not that they're not smart people, because a lot of times I don't give them a break, because they should know better than what they're saying. But I've come to find in some of the writings of some of my people that I respect as academics, you see that they do the cognitive dissonance thing. Like my book, it's taken me 4 years to write this book. People always say, oh, it's coming out. But then I go, oh my God, I was wrong about a presupposition. Let me go back. Or I found a source that made me rethink what I was saying. You got to be honest. That's academic honesty. And I've seen that a lot of people don't have that honesty. They come across a fact that doesn't go to their narrative, and they'll ignore that fact. So there's as much politics and division in academics as it is in the world. I see now people can find their own pet academic to agree with their brand of BS on the left or the right to run their game, as opposed to, let's look at this for real. I consider you an academic. I mean, I call us scholars, whether you self-taught or learn in a university. If you have the ability of nuanced thought, I consider you a scholar. I don't care if you have a GED or a PhD. It all comes down to the conversation and what's shown and the ability to think. And you're right. The problem in America is our education system, I think, has failed Americans, because it hasn't taught us how to be open and think and analyze and weigh information. That's the one thing we have to do. We're at a point, I tell people, our slave ancestors died ripping out pages of Bibles, getting killed for teaching their kids to read. Right? Slaves literally got killed for teaching their kids to read. We walk around with these computers in our hand that can access the last 10,000 years of human information, and we're using them to look up if Kanye is back with Kim yet. We're looking up, and don't get me wrong, I love sports. Look up the games, but this is what we're focusing on. Really, you can learn anything. You can go on YouTube and you can follow some yokel in his basement talking about, aliens are coming, or you can actually watch a whole lecture series at Cambridge University and actually learn something.
Right.
They're world-renowned universities. Don't get me wrong. I know there's some universities that have their agendas and this, that, and other thing. But they're world-renowned universities. You can learn something about something for real. And what we choose to do, we created our own slavery. There's a book by Dr. Naim Akbar called The Psychological Chains of Slavery. I suggest you read it. He's a good brother. The book, Breaking the Psychological Chains of Slavery, is by Naim Americans, but it applies to anyone if you really think about what he's saying. The hardest chains to break are the psychological ones. The physical ones are easy. the ones in the mind are hard. And I think we got a lot of them out there. I would agree with you. We got a lot of them out there because people aren't trying to really think. They're not trying to think. They just want to be spoon-fed information. I watch Fox News and I believe whatever they say. That's what it is. Or I watch MSNBC, I believe whatever they say. As opposed to weighing out the information you're getting and coming to a rational conclusion for your, But I want to close out with, brother. I'll let you go ahead and close out so you can get on with your evening.
Well, it's been a real joy. I looked at a little bit of your YouTube, and I truly hope it grows. I mean, anything I can do to help along the way, because honestly, it's exactly this kind of discourse that I was hoping people could actually see. And I hope people look at the work you're doing, ask critical questions about the work that I'm doing, and question, like Thomas Jefferson said, even the very existence of God. Examine it for yourself, as I have. And I've come to profound conclusions regarding all that things, which I make no bones about the fact that Jesus is my Lord and Savior. And, I'll scream it from the rooftops. I have no shame in that whatsoever. And it's the most proud thing that I do proclaim. But I will say, it has been, honestly, and I've said it a moment ago, I love an interview where I can have a discourse with an exchange of ideas with somebody where I'm learning something and I'm hearing something that I didn't previously know before. We know the price of everything and the value of nothing in these as a wise man once put. We know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And when you get down to brass tacks, I find our conversation more valuable than, honestly, what most people would consider a month's worth of wages. Because there was a time in human history that the conversation that you and I are having right now, people would have paid money to see. At a time when Europe, I mean, real quick side note,
go ahead.
At a time in Europe when they were in the Dark Ages, well, they were flourishing in North Africa. They were flourishing in Arabia. That they discovered optics, all these things, while they were in what people will call the Dark Ages. Like I said, they were blowing up all over the Muslim world. So at that time, oh my goodness, man, I know we got to cut it short. I better save this for the next time, bro, because I know that I can go down a rabbit hole when it comes to a lot of this stuff. But look, at the end of the day, it's been a real joy. I mean, honestly, this has been the most joy I've had in an interview ever. And it's been a real joy to see where you're coming from. I'd love to do this again in the future, because we're not talking exclusively about farming, which is 9 times out of 10 in an interview. That's what I talk about. The fact that we could even speak from a philosophical standpoint and to have this exchange back and forth, I think so many people, especially people of color, would benefit from if they could even see this. So hopefully in the future, maybe I can get you on my program and we can have this discourse and we can get others out there realizing that there are those of us out here that have darker skin that are capable of higher thought than what you're being presented on the media every day. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to hear a whole high-end philosophical thought from a guy playing in the NBA or NFL or NHL, for that matter. I don't care what it is, MBL or MLB, whatever the case may be. You're going to hear that same kind of there's a whole lot of people out there that would benefit from hearing what we just discussed today, because honestly, it's probably the most important thing I've ever done in recent time. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, I thank you, brother, for being willing to come on. Like I say, you have a nice platform, and and I'm just here with my little. Well, now we're up to 130 followers and subscribers.
You'll grow, but you're too intelligent. That's part of the problem, brother.
Well, I appreciate that. It's actually a strong compliment come from you, because, like I said, I heard some of the historical figures you were quoting in your video. I'm like, man, whoa, this dude knows his stuff, because you were quoting some deep people, and again, and real quick, the fact that your understanding of Roman history and Greek philosophers, and that, I get people saying, oh, that's the white man's history and blah 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 and all that stuff, but I'm like, that's the world's history. The world was a pretty united place. That was the Levant, Africa, that's Asia, right. Where Africa and Asia and Europe met. And, you know, people didn't see themselves as black or white. They saw themselves as people, and they shared and grew. And when you touched on the Muslim world, the golden age of the Islamic world, that is a discussion in itself. A lot of people don't understand where we get a lot of our mathematics and algebra and a whole lot of things, you know, that the Muslim world gave before we get to our modern times, when we get to some of the more extremism that we see, you know, and that is not most or all Muslims, people. We're talking about, you know, what we're talking about. So please don't misconstrue it that way. But I look forward to talking to you again, man. Anytime you want to come on, you can. You know, I appreciate if you decide to have me on, it'd be great. I'd be grateful, but I'm very grateful that you decided to come on here. I really do. I said I thoroughly enjoyed your videos, and talking to you has been a pleasure, and just, you know, seeing your philosophical views and seeing how you view the world, and you know, it was a great conversation. All
Well,
right?
thank you so much. I hope we can do it. It looks like we got a storm rolling in here, and I'm
I
not going to
see.
be around much longer. Hey, it's been a real pleasure, Richard. Thank you so much.
All right, and we'll talk again, brother.
Take care.
Peace.